Just 4 more weeks left in the race to the college football playoff, when we will know who the 12 teams will be competing in this first ever 12-team college football playoff. What does week 12 have in store for us? As so far the month of November, college football has not been shy of chaos. Johnny Sports Network here to provide you with my week 12 college football predictions. And last week, we had the first college football playoff committee ranking for this 12-team playoff. And to provide you my honest thoughts on this, do I like that we have a 12-team playoff? Yes. Do I like how the 12-team playoff is formatted? I do not. And the reason why I don't like the way this is formatted is I feel like that more teams are going to be penalized than they are rewarded. And the reason why I feel that way is when you look at who the committee had in their rankings. They had Oregon at 1, and they've been undoubtedly the best team in college football so far this season. Despite early potential hiccups in the first 2 weeks of the year against Idaho and Boise State, which now seeing Boise State the way that they are playing now, it looks like a justifiable struggle win for Oregon. They had the best win of the season against Ohio State, who they have at number 2 in their rankings. They had Georgia at 3, they lost to Ole Miss, and they had Miami at 4, they lost to Georgia Tech. Texas was 5, Penn State 6, Tennessee 7, Indiana 8, BYU 9, and Notre Dame at 10. They had Boise State at 12, Alabama was 11, SMU and Texas A&M, the first 2 teams out, at 13 and 14. When I look at the rankings, Ohio State is second in the overall rankings, but with the way it's formatted, they would be the 5th seed because they're not a conference champion. With Miami now losing, and they're no longer undefeated, it's a guarantee that whoever ends up winning the ACC championship is not going to be in the top 4 rankings overall. And with the Big 12, the only way that the Big 12 champion is going to even be in the top 4 in the overall rankings is if BYU ends up going undefeated. I think that's the only possible way. So it's pretty much a guarantee that whoever wins the ACC championship and the Big 12 championship won't be in the top 4 rankings overall, but they'll still be a top 4 seed because of the way this is formatted. So they'll get an automatic bye over teams that I do feel like you can have an argument that are more deserving. I'm all for letting the Power 4 conference champions have a spot in the playoff guaranteed, but not an automatic first round bye when there are teams that have played tougher competition throughout the year. And I'm not trying to be biased. It's just what I have seen in the Big Ten and the SEC this season, with them playing much tougher competition throughout the year. I do feel like that the college football playoff format, it should change. They should just let the top 4 seeds be who they feel like are the 4 best teams in college football and let them have the first round bye. If you agree with me, let me know on that. If you disagree, also let me know, and we can perhaps have a peaceful dialogue about it, which I would love to have if you are interested. The 7 games in the docket this week for Week 12. Texas and Arkansas, Utah and Colorado, Cincinnati and Iowa State, Clemson and Pittsburgh, Arizona State and Kansas State, Missouri and South Carolina, and closing things out with the game of the week, a top 10 showdown in Athens, Tennessee and Georgia. Without further ado, let's get to the Week 12 college football predictions. The first game on the docket this week, Texas and Arkansas. Arkansas has been a team that I really did feel like a month ago was one of the more underrated teams in college football, but their last three games, it has been quite the letdown for the Razorbacks. A blowout loss to LSU and a blowout loss to Ole Miss, both of them at home. And I really did feel like Arkansas needed at least another signature win to keep Sam Pittman around, as there were talks going into the season that Sam Pittman could be on his way out, depending on how Arkansas did this season. And I have mentioned a couple of times throughout the season that Arkansas could have a much better record if it weren't for turnovers costing them in some games. Most in particular against Oklahoma State and Texas A&M. Texas, they are ninth in total offense, averaging 465.2 yards per game. Arkansas is fifth in total offense, averaging 483.6 yards per game. Quarterback Taylor Green is questionable for the Razorbacks in this game with a knee injury. I do think if Taylor Green does play in this game, I think Arkansas has the capability of keeping Arkansas in this game. However, defensively, Arkansas I don't think has what it takes to keep up, as Arkansas is 90th in total defense, giving up an average of 387.4 yards per game, while Texas, they are scoring 38.9 points per game on average, which is 10th in the FBS. And defensively, Texas is way better than Arkansas by multiple country miles, as they're fourth in scoring defense, only allowing an average of 12.11 points per game. They're also second in total defense, only giving up an average of 251 yards per game. But the one thing that is going well for Arkansas in this game is if they can move the ball efficiently on this very tough Texas defense, as they are 10th in first down offense in the FBS. So if they can establish early momentum on first down early in drives, then they have a chance. However, I am going to pick the Longhorns in this game, as Arkansas in this last month, they have really not exceeded the expectations that I had for them. Although, with this being college football November, when I look at the schedule, besides whoever loses between Tennessee and Georgia, a top 10 team guaranteed to lose, I feel like Texas could be the most ideal team to be upset. But I just think this Texas team is just too talented to lose to a team like Arkansas. But we'll see how things play out this Saturday. Up next, we have Utah and Colorado. Utah is desperate to get back in the win column. Last week's loss to BYU, a 22-21 defeat in a rivalry game, in a game where Utah feels the game was taken from them, as Utah's athletic director, he really went off in the post-game press conference, as did Utah head coach Kyle Whittingham. As Utah, they have now lost 5 in a row, and now they take on Colorado on the road, a Colorado team that has arguably been the most improved team in college football compared to a year ago. As Colorado, they have really shown improvements throughout this season. Shedeur Sanders is 6th in the FBS in passing yards with 2,882 on the season. Travis Hunter is 11th in the FBS in receiving yards with 856 on the year. And Travis Hunter, he is arguably a lot of people's frontrunner to win the Heisman Trophy. For me at this point, with Cam Ward losing last week, which part of it you can consider it being on him, but the defense really let down Miami, as did the offensive line. I do think it's Ashton Genty at this point in time. And Colorado, they are 59th in total offense, averaging 398.6 yards per game. Defensively, they are in the middle of the pack, 68th in total defense, allowing an average of 367.2 yards per game. And I am very interested to see how the first 5 to 10 minutes of this game starts out for Utah. I look forward to seeing their response after feeling like they were cheated out of the win last week against BYU. It looked like Utah, they had the fourth down stop, but then a defensive holding penalty is called, extending BYU's drive, and they're able to go down and kick the game-winning field goal. Utah, defensively, I think they can hold their own against this Colorado offense, as they are 14th in total defense, only giving up an average of 307.4 yards per game. They're also 11th in scoring defense, only allowing an average of 17.11 points per game. They're also first in third down defense, where opponents are only converting on third down 23.8% of the time, and they are 7th in time of possession. And a big reason for that, running back Micah Bernard, one of the more underrated running backs in college football, in my opinion. I do think Colorado wins this game. However, I do think Utah's defense is going to be able to hold their own in this game and make it a close game. However, I think just like we have seen a couple of times in recent weeks, Utah's defense, they step up to the occasion and hold their own, but their offense just can't produce enough points to win the game. And I think that's the case once again this week for Utah. As Utah, they are in the running for one of the biggest disappointments in college football this season. I do think Colorado wins this game, but I think Utah, they will surprisingly keep it close, in my opinion, mainly because of their defense, keeping them in the game. Up next, we have a Big 12 matchup, a Big 12 conference that has been really out of the ordinary this season. Cincinnati and Iowa State. Iowa State desperate to get back in the win column, as a couple of weeks ago they were undefeated, but now they have lost their last 2 games as they take on a Cincinnati team that may have 4 losses, but I do think this Cincinnati team is a team with a lot more grit than I think a lot of people may realize. 3 of their 4 losses have been by less than 7 points. Pittsburgh, early in the season, that was a game where it looked like Cincinnati was going to just keep rolling along in that game, but then Pittsburgh, they rallied back to win that game. Then against Texas Tech, a few weeks later, a missed field goal to send the game into overtime where they potentially could have won. And last week against West Virginia, a West Virginia team where I did feel like West Virginia, they were due for a marquee win. And Cincinnati isn't exactly a superior opponent to an extent, but Cincinnati, they've been doing really solid this season, and they have the 11-point loss to Colorado, who controls their own destiny in the Big 12 at this point in time. Both of these teams, they're in the top 30 in offense. Iowa State 29th, averaging 439.6 yards per game. Cincinnati 30th, averaging 438.6 yards per game. Cincinnati, they are 46th in scoring defense, giving up an average of 22.22 points per game. Iowa State, they are 19th in scoring defense, only giving up an average of 18.78 points per game. And to me, as much as I think Cincinnati, they had the offense, I feel like, to stay in this game and potentially win it, I just don't think their defense is going to be able to make enough stops in this game. As much as I have felt like Iowa State was a little bit in over their heads and a little overrated as of weeks ago, as the writing I feel like was on the wall for Iowa State. They are 40th in total defense. So Iowa State, they're in the top 40 in defense from a stat standpoint, only giving up an average of 336.2 yards per game. I just think this is going to be another game where Cincinnati loses, but they're going to have a gritty performance and make it a close game. But I think Iowa State, they do win this game and get back in the win column, as they do bounce back from this 2-game losing streak they're on right now. Clemson and Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, exactly like Iowa State, undefeated just a couple of weeks ago, but they are also on a 2-game losing streak, with losses to SMU and Virginia in back-to-back weeks. And now they take on a Clemson team who responded really well against Virginia Tech on the road after losing to Louisville at home in dominant fashion the week prior. We have some pretty good offenses in this matchup, as Clemson is 14th in scoring offense, scoring an average of 37.7 points per game. They're also 7th in total offense, averaging 473.4 yards per game. Pittsburgh, they are 16th in scoring offense, scoring an average of 36.7 points per game. And they're 36th in total offense, averaging 427.8 yards per game. Clemson, 50th in scoring defense, only allowing an average of 22.44 points per game, while Pittsburgh, they are 72nd in scoring defense, allowing an average of 25.11 points per game. For Clemson, quarterback Cade Klubnik, watching his entire career at Clemson unfold, it is pretty night and day with him. You don't know what you're going to expect from Cade Klubnik, and now going on the road in November. And Pittsburgh quarterback Eli Holstein, he's been underrated throughout the season, but these last 2 weeks, it has been pretty disappointing for this Pittsburgh team. One of those teams who was flying under the radar, and it looked like that they could find themselves in this 12-team college football playoff. But this matchup, I do feel like that, just like a couple matchups we had last week, this is going to, essentially, in my opinion, be a college football playoff matchup. But I do feel like this is, at least in other tournaments that we see in other sports, this feels like a round of 32 matchup, in my opinion. As the winner, they're still going to have a small sliver of hope to make this 12-team playoff, while whoever loses is going to be eliminated from contention. And as much as I really want to call for the upset in this matchup, I have to favor Clemson in this matchup, because they at least established some confidence going into this game with the win on the road last week against Virginia Tech. While Pittsburgh, I don't know where their confidence is right now, losing 2 straight after being undefeated. I just have to go with the better coaching in this matchup, and that is Dabo Swinney. Even though Dabo Swinney, he's had some moments in these last couple of seasons where he maybe looks overrated as a coach, but I have more confidence in him getting his team ready for this game on Saturday in what is essentially a college football playoff matchup, in my opinion. Arizona State and Kansas State, another matchup this week that I feel is very underrated and a matchup that not a lot of people are talking about. This is a matchup between two great running games and two quarterbacks that aren't the most efficient quarterbacks in the country, but they still have done just enough to win their team some games this season. For Arizona State, Sam Leavitt is completing 61.2% of his passes for 1,631 yards on the year, 14 touchdown passes, and 4 interceptions. For Kansas State, Avery Johnson is completing 61% of his passes for 1,892 yards, 17 touchdown passes, and 7 interceptions. But I do think the story of this game is going to be the running game. As for Arizona State, Cam Scatabo, 1,001 rushing yards this season, 10th in the FBS. He did not play in the game last week against UCF, and he is questionable for this game. DJ Giddens for Kansas State, 995 rushing yards on the year, 11th in the FBS. Arizona State is 33rd in run defense, allowing an average of 118.8 rushing yards per game. Kansas State, they're 8th in rushing defense, only giving up an average of 99.4 rushing yards per game. Arizona State is 35th in total defense, giving up an average of 330.8 yards per game. Kansas State, 34th in total defense, giving up an average of 329.7 yards per game. For me, this game I think is going to come down to which team runs the ball better in this matchup. I do think if Cam Scatabo, if he does play this game, I do like Arizona State's chances in this game. If he doesn't, then I do think there is a whole lot of pressure on Sam Leavitt going on the road to have to make plays to pull off this upset. And Arizona State, they are not a bad team at all. As Arizona State, they may not be in the rankings at this point in time, but I do feel like Arizona State, they are one of those teams that I do think it's a top 25 caliber team, and I do think they're going to prove it. While Kansas State, on paper, they may have a better running game, at least as far as depth is concerned. I just think with this Arizona State team, with Kansas State really struggling a little bit in their last couple of games, I do think if Cam Scatabo does play in this game, I think Arizona State wins and pulls off the upset. Even though Avery Johnson, he has made some plays to win some games, the Colorado game, it sticks out to me the most. But Kansas State, I'm really not necessarily sold on them right now, as they have been struggling as of late. But if Cam Scatabo doesn't play in this game, then I just think Kansas State is going to have their way with Arizona State's running game. Missouri and South Carolina. Missouri with an emotional win last week over Oklahoma, where Brady Cook did not play in the game, and his status for this game is unknown at this point in time, where a scoop and score by the Missouri defense really late in the game, Oklahoma going for the victory, trying to get into field goal range instead of playing for overtime. Drew Pine, he did manage the game really well. 14 for 27, 143 yards, 3 touchdown passes. They go on the road to take on a really underrated South Carolina team They may have 3 losses on the year, but their only bad game of the season was against Ole Miss. The LSU game in week 3, that was a really controversial game. A game I felt like South Carolina should have won, but it turned into ref ball. And a few weeks later against Alabama, one or two things just need to go differently, and South Carolina probably would have won that game. So this could potentially easily be a one-loss South Carolina team. As Missouri, many have felt they are overrated, which I can understand why people feel that way. But Missouri defensively, they've had a really good season. They are 10th in total defense, only allowing an average of about 295 yards a game. South Carolina, they are 12th in total defense, giving up an average of 301.3 yards per game. Missouri is 16th in scoring defense. They're tied with Georgia, allowing an average of 18.4 points per game. While South Carolina, they're 12th in scoring defense, only giving up an average of 17.56 points per game. And a big key for Missouri into pulling off this upset. South Carolina, you don't know what you're going to get from South Carolina, at least in the past couple of seasons under Shane Beamer. Missouri is second in the country in first down defense. A big reason why South Carolina was able to upset Texas A&M a couple of weeks ago is Texas A&M, they had a really tough time getting to Lenora Sellers. As Lenora Sellers, he is one of those quarterbacks where you have to get early contact. You have to force pressure onto him early in the game if you're going to have any chance of success. And also, Raheem Sanders is averaging 5.3 yards per carry. The Arkansas transfer. And whether or not Brady Cook starts for Missouri in this game, or Drew Pine, as well as Drew Pine did last week in managing the game, and how well Missouri's done defensively from a stats and numbers standpoint, I just think it's going to be a lot like the Texas A&M and South Carolina game a couple of weeks ago, where I think Missouri's defense is going to have a really difficult time getting to Lenora Sellers. And I also might add, if Lenora Sellers, if he didn't get injured in that game against LSU, South Carolina, they probably win it. As LSU's defense, they've been proven to be a flawed defense once again this season, even though LSU's defense, they've shown a little improvement, but not enough. But that is another topic for another day. I think South Carolina wins this game with Lenora Sellers having a good game, and Missouri has a tough time containing him and Raheem Sanders. Closing things out with the game of the week, Tennessee and Georgia, a top 10 showdown in Athens. Tennessee still sitting at one loss on the season, and it was to Arkansas on the road, where it was a bad performance offensively by Tennessee. Their defense, they did everything they could. And Tennessee's defense, they find themselves fifth in total defense, only giving up an average of 271.6 yards per game. Fifth in scoring defense, only giving up an average of 12.56 points per game. Georgia defensively, they are still looking good, but not at the elite status that we have seen in the last couple of seasons. 13th in total defense, giving up an average of 306.4 yards per game. 16th in scoring defense, giving up an average of 18.44 points per game. Georgia, despite the productive wins against Texas and Clemson earlier in the season, With Georgia suffering their second loss of the season on the road last week against Ole Miss, in a game where, at least offensively, it was abysmal for Georgia. I haven't seen a Georgia team look so out of sync in a while. Carson Beck has thrown 9 interceptions in Georgia's last 4 games, 12 on the season. Tennessee running back Dylan Sampson, he's 7th in the FBS in rushing yards with 1,129 on the year. Tennessee's 15th in scoring offense, scoring an average of 37.6 points per game. Tennessee is 2nd in the FBS in third down defense. Opponents are only converting on third down against Tennessee 24.2% of the time. And for Georgia, they are 5th in third down defense. Opponents are only converting on third down against Georgia 28.6% of the time. This is Tennessee's best chance at upsetting Georgia in a long time. And back in 2022, it looked like it was the best chance that Tennessee's had, where they were the number 1 team going into it. Going to that game a couple years ago, it was slated to be one of the biggest games in college football in a long time, the game of the season. But then Georgia, they showed why they were the defending champions at the time and winning in dominant fashion. And Georgia's backs, they're against the wall now that they're a 2-loss team. Even though they have signature wins against Texas and Clemson, the win against Clemson, I still think it's a really good win for Georgia, but the committee may not feel that way, regardless of how this season ends for Georgia. But a third loss for Georgia, even though they are in the SEC, even though they do have those productive victories, I think a third loss, it would all but ensure that Georgia is out. So Georgia knows they're in must-win territory. And Kirby Smart knows it. Kirby Smart has learned from the best in Nick Saban. And there has been times throughout this season where Georgia, they have been counted out. The 13-12 win against Kentucky earlier in the season. The next game, some people, they were counting them out. I didn't pick them to win against Alabama that week, but the first half of that game, they looked really abysmal. In the second half, they did respond, even had the lead late, but then they surrendered the lead right back in one play. And Carson Beck's 3 interceptions were part of the difference of why Georgia lost that game. And Georgia was still counted out going into the Texas game on the road, where Texas was number 1. Georgia, they were being counted out by a lot of people, including myself. As a lot of people, including myself, felt like Texas, they were establishing themselves as the number 1 team in the country at the time. But then Georgia, they go on the road. They win convincingly, dominating the game from start to finish. And now with the second loss to Ole Miss last week, I think people may be in the same boat where they're counting out Georgia. But then right when you count out Georgia, Georgia rises to the occasion. And I think this is another one of those situations where Georgia, they respond, they bounce back, they know how to respond. And I think they win this game as they know their backs are against the wall. And I think they will prevail. And that will do it for my Week 12 college football predictions. If there was a game I did not predict this week that you would like my thoughts on, please leave in the comment section down below, and I will give you a response. Also, for those that tune in for the NFL predictions, the Week 11 NFL predictions will be out tomorrow. Also, I did not do my Week 11 college football takeaways yet. That will be on YouTube Shorts, most likely tonight or sometime tomorrow. For those that don't tune in for either of those things, enjoy the games this weekend. Hope to see you back next week. And remember, Vegas is always watching.